We've got a question here from this question from Andre.
Okay.
Everyone, name one or more technologies that you supported or reported as a future game changer and faced backlash for, and whether you were eventually proven right or wrong. I'm going to go first here and say I was super blown away by Stereoscopic 3D when I first saw it. I think probably the effect that really impressed me the most was Stardust, Super Stardust on the PS3. Housemarque did an amazing conversion of Stardust into Stereo 3D here,
Oh
effectively
man.
running at 720p, 120 frames per second. Man, I loved that. I thought Stereo 3D was going to be awesome. And it was awesome, but it never really went anywhere because, nobody wanted to wear those crazy specs. However, with that said, it it was a future game changer in the sense that a lot of that work carried on straight into VR. So the Evolution Studios guys who were championing Stereo 3D, they basically transitioned all of that work across to PSVR. So, I think that's kind of like an example of a emerging technology that I was really excited about that didn't go anywhere, but kind of did. John, what do you think about this?
First, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because the stereoscopic 3D stuff combined with like sort of movement based control that was originally pioneered kind of by the Wii, like
The
those
Wii?
technologies came
Hmm.
together to lead to the type of modern VR we have today, which is
Yep.
why the first technology I would say for myself is in fact VR, which that's something that's been talked about for decades, but
Right.
it always kind of comes and goes, and we're in a little bit of a lull period again for the moment, with especially with the news this week about Meta closing down some amazing studios, which screw them. But
Mm.
I will say I've continued to be really big on VR because I think it can just lead to these amazing experiences. I saw some people talk about this recently, but like you play Half-Life Alyx today, like right now, it still feels like a game from the future. Like it's really insane, just like what they did in that. There's so many things and scenarios and ideas in that game that just you've not seen in anything else, and we've never seen before or since. It's really crazy. But it even goes back to like I remember the first time I picked up an Oculus DK2 for myself to fiddle around with, and loading up something the new retro arcade and walking around in VR like a virtual arcade and playing arcade games like inside the space. It just created this sense of place that was it really stuck with me. So I've continued to sort of push VR since then. Some other things, though, I would say, and this also kind of was born out of work done for stereoscopic 3D to some degree, is this push for motion clarity as a tech, right? We talked about Pulsar recently. I did that review last week. You and I, Rich, we talked about that. Ever since the rise of flat panels, I mean, going back to when they were first being introduced, I was always very much against like them for the reason that they destroyed motion clarity. Like that was the big thing, and we've been stuck there for so long. So technology such as black frame insertion, backlight strobing, all these different things I feel have been very, very important for trying to solve the problem with motion clarity. And in fact, you look at something like Blurbusters and like Mark, he's basically dedicated a huge chunk of his entire career to researching and solving these problems,
Yeah.
because those of us that are sensitive to them, it matters a lot. And I think more and more people are starting to realize the benefits and reasons for targeting these super clear motion resolution. It's super important.
Hmm.
I would also, the last one I would say alongside that is specifically the rise of OLED and HDR, whether
Right.
together or separate. But um, I've ever since I saw I think the first time I really saw it was, you might even recall, it was at E3 where Gears 4 was shown,
Hmm.
and they had a demo on a large LG OLED of the game running with HDR enabled, and I was like, oh, like when as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, this solves my other flat panel complaint, which is bad contrast, just like a flat looking image. Like the depth you got, even with an older, like a 10-year-old OLED at the time, like the the quality of the image was such that it just really floored me. And ever since then, I've kind of been a strong proponent of these sort of like high contrast displays and displays capable of reaching high brightness while maintaining that contrast. And I think I've been proven right on that, and that was the way forward. And the more traditional, like just generic backlight LCDs and stuff that were everywhere in the market, they've become way less desirable. And it's weird, like if you look at the comments on Pulsar, a lot of people were like really into what they're doing there with the motion clarity, but everybody's like, well, if it's not OLED, like what's the point, right?
Mm.
And even though that's not compatible with OLED, it's interesting and fun to see that just the general consumer sentiment now is that if you're not doing OLED, like what are you even doing, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because it does, and I'm so happy. Like 10 years ago, OLED was a technology where it's like, oh man, the burn in, you got to watch out, stuff like that. And now, like, there's so many PC monitors shipping with it. You know, I use my OLED monitors like a normal LCD monitor. Like, I take zero precautions. Everything's on, it's bright. You know, I just leave on screen elements on there all the time. No issues like that. And when you look at like our ratings results, when they did that torture test of the screens, they did get some burn in on their OLEDs for sure, but it was the LCDs and the backlights that were failing at a much higher rate.
Yep.
Backlights
Right.
going out, chunks of the backlight going out. Like backlight failure seems to be more prevalent overall than burn-in, and kind of like a more of a serious problem. Even a friend of mine, I mean, he was using like a Sony LCD for years, and like the upper left portion of the backlight was just dimmer than the rest of the screen for like the last 5 years. And
Yikes.
it looked bad, and it was just like it was a failure. Something in the backlight went bad. So OLED baby.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're quite right, John. I've got three OLEDs in the house. I've got a 48-inch CX, which I use as my main monitor. I've got a 77-inch C1 in the living room, and the old, I think it's the B6, which I got in 2016, which is just in one of the bedrooms. They all still work. However, the nano cell LG, the 8K 75-inch one, that has stopped functioning. Which is a bit of a shame. Yeah.
Actually, Rich, I think your LG CX is slowly becoming like a really interesting test point, right? You've been using it on a desktop for almost 6 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and this is an older OLED as well now. Like,
Yeah,
and it
no
still
burning
looks good,
whatsoever.
right?
Yeah,
That
to
that's
begin with,
phenomenal.
I was looking after it, but then I just got bored with doing things like, taskbars that scroll out of view, that sort of thing. I just run it as a normal monitor now. Still no burning on it. But let's go back to the question. And Alex, surely it's got to be ray tracing for you.
Oh yeah,
So
yep.
I was going to talk about it, but I don't know if it sounds self-aggrandizing if I say something about
do it.
ray tracing.
Well,
The
there's
ray
still
tracing guy
there's
said
still
something about ray
there's
tracing.
still plenty of people that will say you're wrong. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Why not? So I guess when ray tracing came about, I saw it easily as the future of all rendering, at least on PC. And I think the initial release of titles and the initial wave of skepticism, including, a lot of videos where people would say it's lazy to use ray tracing. Here's how you can bake lighting for 16,000 hours and get the same results or whatever. We saw those things back then. But nowadays, the fact that it is prevalent in all engines for the most part, the biggest engine on the market, Unreal, has it on per default in a software or hardware form. And, all the best looking games extensively use it. I think it's not a surprise that where we've arrived today. And I think it's borne out to being a great tech. So I'll say I was maybe more right in that one. Ones where I've probably been a little bit wrong and or did not know about that they would be big. I would say I thought variable rate shading, when it initially was demoed, would be a way bigger thing. I thought that the idea of varying based upon human perception how much shading is done in a region would take off. But I, at the same time, did not see that what machine learning could do for image reconstruction at all. It just wasn't even on the radar at that point in time. the demos we had were less than convincing or problematic, or just not nearly as good as you'd want them to be a replacement technology. And so I thought VRS would make more sense in like 2019 versus something like what DLSS does. And the future has arrived, and it's the exact opposite. VRS kind of seems useless in the time when you could instead just use a technology which reduces all pixels on screen but infers them in a much better way. And there's things like VRS seemingly really never got past. I'm pretty sure in almost every single game that uses VRS, in spite of them also using stuff like reconstruction on top, you can still see the bricks of VRS degradation in the image. And I would have always thought that you could reconstruct them into like a clean single subpixel of that, but it never ended up happening in almost any single game. So I don't know. I feel like that technology is a really big dud, even though I thought it would have been bigger at the time.
I feel like Gears 5 did a good job with this when they updated it with VRS for Series X. Like, it's relatively invisible for the most part, but that's not true for most games that have used it.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen more problematic implementations of it than we've seen good ones. I feel usually, or just like the performance not being worth the degradation. It's, sometimes on like a PC GPU, you're getting like 4% at 4K, and it's like, why am I turning this on? This doesn't really matter. I would say that that's an area where I got confused about what would happen in the future, and I was pretty wrong about it. One thing that we've kind of been slightly ambivalent on is just ultra fast SSDs in games. I feel like at the beginning of this hardware generation, we all had different views on it. And at the end, it's kind of just been like faster loading, which, it's less exciting than it could have been in the future, based upon like, what you think could happen if we are always using an SSD for everything versus what games were made. We kind of have the more boring future where everything just loads quickly, but the games aren't wholly different yet, at least most of them. So
yeah, I remember getting the absolute worst PCIe 4 SSD and putting it in a PlayStation 5, and actually it ran just fine. That was quite funny. Yeah,
I'm reminded of something right now. Oh my God, Backlash. I think in my initial video for FSR, AMD's FSR, I was not positive about it. And I said it doesn't like deserve to be compared to DLSS, more or less. They were two different technologies.
Sure.
And lo and behold, FSR 1, at the time, DLSS killer. But nowadays, I think it has a very negative user response. Same with FSR 2 and 3. So I think slight little vindication there for me for being more, I would say, critical of the image quality of those technologies.
I mean, it was what it was. It was faster because it was running at a lower resolution and kind of looked like it with slight mitigations. The VRS thing, I guess you didn't get any backlash for it, and I think Infinity Ward would actually say their software VRS solution has been a bit of a game changer for them, but wider scale adoption, probably not.